EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, November 2nd, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Blair LM Kelley, author of Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class. Also on the show today, after being confronted by a pro-peace rabbi in Minneapolis, Biden calls for a pause in Gaza. Not a ceasefire, but a marked shift in tone. And the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, Dick Durbin, says the word ceasefire this morning on cable news. It's beginning to grow, folks. Don't let up. This comes as the death toll crosses 9,000 in Gaza and ground troops approach Gaza City. The UN estimates 300,000 people are still in North Gaza and Gaza City. The nearby children's hospital is overwhelmed with patients and few supplies after Israel struck the Jabalia refugee camp not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Triple tap.
War crimes experts say there is no explanation. Except genocidal intent, I would argue. And hundreds of Americans trapped in Gaza have been granted passage through Egypt's Rafah crossing as anger and strife within the State Department grows. And a split within the Republican Party becomes more evident. McConnell wants Israel and Ukraine money together, as does Schumer. Mike Johnson in the House does not. Senate Republicans also starting to get pissed off at Tommy Tuberville, who's held up hundreds of U.S. military nominees over a Pentagon abortion policy. Lindsey Graham yelled at him. It was fun. The House votes down this motion to censure Rashida Tlaib, with every Democrat voting no and 23 Republicans joining. I will say that despite his rhetoric, Hakeem Jeffries has been better so far at keeping the caucus together on these issues. Also kept them together in earlier the speaker fight, but the motion to expel George Santos also failed, FYI. Oregon teachers are on strike, closing schools, asking for higher wages and reduced class size. Solidarity with them. Don Jr. took the stand in the civil fraud trial, and very surprisingly, he's got a bit of a fuzzy memory. Trans families or families of trans people, I should say, in Tennessee asked the Supreme Court to block the state's transgender care ban. And lastly, rest in power, Ady Barkan, a fierce advocate for Medicare for all, who dedicated his life to good. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. Ady Barkan, I mean, people may remember during the 2020 presidential campaign how he met with many of the candidates. I believe he was kind of more associated with the Warren campaign, but
nobody's perfect.
I mean, sure, right, but that really was just an aside to get everybody to remember. You know, you probably heard from Ady at some point during that campaign.
Yeah, I will say, just to jump in, like Nancy Pelosi, I don't want to see her as somebody who was one of the key people standing in front of what Ady was fighting for, to come out and say like, he was working towards a better future. No, he was working towards
Medicare
healthcare
for all. Yeah, single payer
and
healthcare.
a future she didn't want,
right?
And still,
she obstructed
and still doesn't.
Yes. So it is the unfortunate virtue signaling of politicians who choose to do nothing. But for the advocates that knew Addy, they knew what he was fighting for, and I'm immensely grateful for the fact that he knew that he was going to pass away, and he used that period of time on this planet to advocate for healthcare for everybody who might be going through a similar situation, and everybody that just needs care in general. So rest in power, Addy. You will be missed. Now on to some more, death in this world, but hopefully we're starting to see some movement. This is really the first time from a U.S. perspective, from a domestic politics perspective, that we're seeing any semblance of brake tapping from the Biden administration on Israel's response since October 7th, since the Hamas terror attack. Up to this point, Biden has basically been full-throated in his support for Israel's response, but it is growing more and more untenable. Yesterday evening, Biden was in Minneapolis for a fundraiser, and Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, who has done work with the Jewish Voice for Peace group that we've praised so many times on this program, stood up in the middle of his speech and asked Biden to call for a ceasefire, and this takes incredible courage. I'm immensely grateful for all of the advocates with Jewish Voice for Peace and for people like Jessica.
Very fine people on both sides. When I heard that, I knew.
Mr. President, if you care about Jewish people, as a rabbi, I need you to call for a ceasefire right now. A ceasefire and met with boos. I mean, who knows if that's booing, how dare you interrupt our esteemed president?
Yes.
Or if it's necessary, or if the people in that room are really that repugnant. It's hard for me to say. But either way, I mean, kudos to Jessica.
Absolutely. The people in that room were there. That was $1,000 a person fundraiser.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the donor class of the Democratic Party, which explains why you see this massive disconnect. They should break down the Democratic coalition by people who can get into that room and people who just have to vote for Democrats because that's the only people labor and social groups can get behind in this country.
Right.
And as we've seen before, if you recall that video from that fundraiser for Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey on Martha's Vineyard when climate protesters were there, these are some of the most odious, vile, militant people against any sort of structural change in this country.
Oh yeah,
that posture themselves and fashion themselves as good capital D Democrats looking for change, and that these people are putting sand in the spokes, and that how dare they interrupt the president of the United States? They're.
Well, for them,
beyond any sort of repudiation I could possibly express.
For them, their association with the Democratic Party is essentially a pin that says, I am a decent person, and I can go to a cocktail party and say I'm against racism as I propagate the mass dehumanization of Palestinian people and seem to think that is in some way in keeping with leftist values in any fashion. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, this is a Jewish Voice for Peace. For people who don't know where they stand, because I think a lot of people are smearing that organization, and a lot of people are joining it because it's fundamentally righteous. But Jewish Voice for Peace is guided by a vision of justice, equality, freedom for all people. We unequivocally oppose Zionism because it is counter to those ideals. Through study and action, through deep relationship with Palestinians fighting for their own liberation, and through our own understanding of Jewish safety and self-determination, we have come to see that Zionism was a false and failed answer to the desperately real question many of our ancestors face of how to protect Jewish lives from murderous anti-Semitism in Europe. While it had many strains historically, the Zionism that took hold and stands today as a settler colonial movement establishing an apartheid state where Jews have more rights than others. Our history teaches us how dangerous this can be. Those people are need all the support.
100% accurate. And I mean, this gets lost a little bit as we're counting the bodies in Gaza, and we're up to over 9,000 dead, and that's certainly an undercount, by the way.
And those remaining alive are getting hungrier and thirstier as the minutes tick by.
97% of the population there don't have clean water at this point. Babies drinking brackish water. But I mean, another point that can be made there is, what does this do to the security of Israelis? I mean, there are 9 million Israelis, a country of 9 million people. Does the escalating violence against civilians, dropping bombs on hundreds to kill one Hamas fighter and then openly bragging about it on CNN, what does that do to the population that will remain, if Israel allows any to remain and they're unable to fully annihilate the people in North Gaza? What do you think their reaction is going to be? Do you think that they will just get broken into submission? Or do you think that they will harbor incredible anger and rage towards their neighbors that indiscriminately bombed and killed maybe 3 of their children for or something like that? This is what the cycle of violence does. It just creates more insecurity for everybody involved. And the fact is that Israel has much more power, many more resources to continue killing indiscriminately with no clear end in sight. And thankfully, though, after that, after Jessica Rosenberg stood up and said those statements and called for a ceasefire, Biden responded and said that he wants there to be a, quote, pause, which is kind of in keeping with what Bernie Sanders had said a few days ago, calling for a, quote, humanitarian pause on the floor of the Senate. I don't find that to be an acceptable answer, but you can see that that this is clearly being workshopped within the Democratic caucus in conjunction with the White House on the Senate side of things. And of course, the squad has been more explicit in their calls for a ceasefire, but we did finally this morning get one member of the Senate to call for a ceasefire and say the words ceasefire, or at least respond to this question here by Poppy Harlow on CNN and say, I think it is time for a ceasefire. This is Dick Durbin, not on my, to use a stupid Twitter phrase, bingo card for the first Democratic senator to call for a ceasefire. Before Bernie Sanders, before Elizabeth Warren, Dick Durbin, number 2 senator in the Democratic caucus. This is important.
It's how controlled.
It's controlled, but yeah.
The majority whip, the chair of the Judiciary Committee. But yeah, I mean, of course, it's definitely controlled. Obviously, he wouldn't go out there and say this without some sort of approval or some sort of go ahead. But at the same time, like you said, before Bernie Sanders, before John Fetterman, obviously.
But Durbin is also from Illinois, and there is a significant Arab population in Illinois. So keep raising your voice. It's making a difference. Even a really, really mainstream Democrat like Dick Durbin, who we've criticized on this program for not going hard enough in his role as the chair of the Judiciary Committee against the corruption of guys like Clarence Thomas, said this on CNN this morning: thank effing God.
I think a lot of people listening to People in Power, President, you, Secretary Blinken, calling for a humanitarian pause, are asking themselves, why is that different from a ceasefire? 2 years ago, 2021, during an escalation of violence between Israel and Gaza, you called for a ceasefire and you said you, quote, couldn't disagree more with Netanyahu's policies, quote, when it came to the treatment of Palestinians. Is a ceasefire needed now?
I think it is, at least in the context of both sides agreeing. For example, the release of those who have been kidnapped should be part of this, immediate release. That should be the beginning of it. An effort should be made to engage in conversation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Let's face it, this has gone on for decades. Whatever the rationale from the beginning, it has now reached an intolerable level. We need to have a resolution in the Middle East that gives some promise for the future.
Have you told the president, the White House, you think it's time for a ceasefire? Because that is a word that the president is intentionally not using.
Well, believe me, what I said earlier about ceasefires under circumstances, for example, the release of those who have been kidnapped as part of it, indication that this is a good faith effort on the part of the other side. But no, I've not communicated with the White House on that.
Well, they heard you now. Senator Lindsey Graham on CNN this week.
All right, well, we'll play that in a second, but go ahead.
That's what everybody always meant when they said ceasefire. Yep. And nobody should pretend otherwise. I get that they have to sort of slow walk this. And look, here's the thing. If ultimately we get a ceasefire, but these people have to call it a humanitarian pause, sure. Whatever. But what needs to happen is the violence needs to stop. And honestly, the international community, we're seeing things like saying that they need to come in and help administer Gaza after this. they need to administer this entire one state that is in there, which is called Israel. The United Nations gave it to them like 75 years ago, the Western powers, and this project has failed. This exclusive, it's developed exactly the way that people said it might, into this horror. And so the international community needs to come in, and we need to develop a actual, if it wants to be a two-state solution, if it's not going to be a one-state democratic for everyone solution, but that stuff has to be done, and Israel's government can't be trusted to do it.
Yeah, it cannot be. And just, I mean, the growing understanding of the conditions in Gaza prior to this that were underlying it's beginning to permeate. I saw Ta-Nehisi Coates this morning on Democracy Now! Speaking about his experience of going to, I believe he was in the West Bank, and drawing a line to the experiences of the Palestinians who are unable to vote to the experiences of Black Americans when they were disenfranchised. And it underscores how there has been this historic solidarity with Black activists in the United States and with the Palestinian cause. You can look up what Malcolm X had to say about Palestine. And we will get later to the bastardization of Martin Luther King by one Amy Schumer, but that's a bit of a third, fourth order situation here, as we try to open the show with the top line news of this conflict. Compare what Dick Durbin said here to what Lindsey Graham has been saying. I mean, it would have been nice if he wiped the blood off his mouth before he said these words, but never enough bloodshed for Muslims or Arab people for Lindsey Graham. One of the most vile people who will be in our Senate right now, who, if there's any justice and if there is any kind of hell, he'll be right at the fieriest part of it once he passes away.
You see why a lot of people, especially all these decades after that, would say we have other options here. I mean, this is not a time where our only weapons are dropping nuclear bombs. There's precision weaponry, there's intelligence. We have so much more information. I don't know. So I guess what I'm wondering is...
Can you pause it, actually? I'm sorry, but the thing is that Israel does have precision weaponry. They have actually the most precise weaponry, the most advanced technology in the world when it comes to this. They can bomb city blocks by address. They understand exactly where their weapons and their missiles are going. This is deliberate.
You can hit a refugee camp 3 times in a row.
You know who can't do that, by the way, and doesn't have an air force, doesn't have all of this technology? It's the Palestinians and Hamas. They have rockets that are completely substandard, and they had their ground operation of the terror attack where they were able to go through the border. But in terms of the symmetry of this, it's just completely not. It's not even in question.
In 2023,
or lack of symmetry,
when militaries as advanced as Israel's and as the United States have choices, is it acceptable to drop bombs on a densely populated civilian area where there are refugees, where people are living, where there are children?
Well, in 2023, who would imagine that someone who survived the Holocaust in World War II would be killed by Islamic terrorists in Israel later in life? In 2023, could anybody imagine a group of people would come into Israel and slaughter families, rape children in front of the parents, burn babies alive, put a baby in the oven? Can you imagine that? I can't imagine that. Here's what I imagine. The destruction of Hamas is non-negotiable. I hate the loss of innocent lives. The day after Hamas is destroyed, I hope we have a better life for the Palestinian people. But I'm not blaming Israel. I'm blaming Hamas. I'm not blaming Israel at all. I know they're trying to limit civilian casualties, and I know Hamas is trying to increase civilian casualties.
Is there a threshold for you, and do you think there should be one for the United States government, at which the U.S. would say, let's hold off for a second in terms of civilian casualties? Is there a point at which you would start to question?
No, if somebody asked us after World War II, is there a limit what you would do to make sure that Japan and Germany don't conquer the world? Is there any limit what Israel should do to the people who are trying to slaughter the Jews? The answer is no. There is no limit, but here's what you need to do. Be smart. Let's try to limit civilian casualties the best we can. Let's put humanitarian aid in areas to protect the innocent. I'm all for that. But this idea that Israel has to apologize for attacking Hamas, who's embedded with their own population needs to stop. The goal is to destroy Hamas. Hamas is creating these casualties, not Israel.
I don't think anyone's asking, well, some people may be asking Israel to apologize, but that's not what I'm asking about. I think the question here is about how they carry out the war, and there are choices here. But you mentioned,
get uncomfortable.
And the Israelis have described it this way: they want to eradicate Hamas, and I think most people agree that that is a reasonable goal. However, how long do you think that will take? How long?
I don't know. Here's what I think.
Is it reasonable for that?
I think we ought to be focusing on the day after Hamas is destroyed, as well as destroying them.
Yeah. He doesn't have an answer for that. He gets uncomfortable and pissed off there as he's being cornered. And the fact that he points out, he mentions Japan there, should set off alarm bells. It is American mythology, and honestly, deeply problematic a retelling of history to claim that our dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was in any way justified. The war was very much close to one at that point. There was some dissension within Japan on their surrender and the conditions of it, but the United States essentially decided that they wanted to be the ones who made the choice, who had their finger on the trigger, and dropped the bombs when it didn't necessarily need to happen in order to teach the Japanese government a lesson there. And the fact that he's using that justification when we killed hundreds of thousands needlessly after the United States and the Allies were victorious is deeply, deeply unsettling.
Their position is so bad that even I think with not great interviewing, Lindsey Graham looks at that bad because that's still laundering. This is not an anti-terror operation anymore. The idea that bombing a refugee camp 3 times in a row is going to lead to less terrorism is absolutely ludicrous. Nobody believes it. Not the Israeli government doing it. They think it's going to lead to more terrorism that they can then use to continue ethnic cleanses, which is what they're doing. And so, like, to say that they say they just want to get rid of Hamas, that's not really all that they're saying. That's maybe like what the IDF spokespeople given to you are saying. You actually look at members of Netanyahu's party, and they are saying we need to get rid of Gaza. We need to flatten Gaza. Mm-hmm. So, like, we're still laundering a ethnically cleansing government right now.
To your point, the Israeli press is doing a way better job of covering what Israel is actually doing than the frickin' United States press and our politicians. This is from the Times of Israel. This is a center-right publication about the appointed head of the Knesset West Bank subcommittee, this MK Zvi Sukkot, okay? I'm going to read this really quickly. Ultranationalist MK and radical settlement activist Zvi Sukkot was appointed Wednesday to serve as the chairman of the Knesset Subcommittee for Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank, under the permanent Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. The appointment was condemned by numerous opposition MKs as well as anti-settlement groups who pointed out that Sukkot has a long history of radicalism in the settlement movement and that settler violence in the West Bank has spiked dramatically since October 7th Hamas assault on Israel, in which over 1,400 people were massacred, most of them civilians. Why is this specific member so extreme? Sukkot's extremist activities have not stopped since he became an MK. But before that, before becoming an MK, Sukkot was a prominent radical settler activist and was arrested at least 3 times for his actions during demonstrations outside the home of the head of the IDF Central Command. Sukkot, who is an MK for the ultranationalist Religious Zionist Party, was also arrested in 2010 by the police due to Shin Bet suspicions that he was involved in the arson of a mosque in the northern West Bank, close to where he lived in the Yitzhar settlement. He was not charged over the incident, however. Sukkot was not drafted into the IDF after he said in his interview with the recruitment office that he had no trust in the military due to its participation in the evacuation of settlers from Gaza and northern West Bank settlements during the 2005 disengagement plan. The IDF declared him, quote, unsuitable for military service. Opposition MKs condemned Sukkot's appointment, with labor leader MK Merav Mikhali calling him, quote, one of the most dangerous people in Israel, a racist, pyromaniac, terror supporter, Shin Bet target. This guy was too extreme for the IDF and was just appointed to head the West Bank subcommittee in the Knesset. That's a terrorist. We're talking about terrorism. A terrorist is leading the West Bank subcommittee.
It's a terror government.
So, can the Western press get on this and call this what it is? It is the center-right Times of Israel calling this what it is. Anyway, before we get to our lovely guest, we have a word from one of our sponsors, or two of them at least. Nuts.com. That's what's keeping me going here. Everybody knows that I'm a huge fan of cashews. It's my energy source throughout the day. And you know, when I'm not able to grab a snack or whatever, or a full meal, I should say, I grab a handful of these Nuts.com cashews, and they really are just awesome. Do you wish you could go to Willy Wonka's candy factory? Well, since that's not exactly possible, let me introduce you to the online version of that, Nuts.com. In addition to an amazing selection of nuts, they have tons of classic candies like butterscotch, fudge, and licorice. Please join us in thanking Nuts.com for supporting the Majority Report. And supporting me, having some energy throughout the show, which sometimes it wanes, but when I have my cashews, it helps me out. Right now, when you go to nuts.com/majority, new customers get a free gift with purchase and free shipping on orders of $29 or more. Nuts.com is your one-stop shop for freshly roasted nuts, dried fruits, sweets, pantry supplies like specialty flours, and more. Their wide selection means there is something for everyone. At Nuts.com, quality is top priority. They roast their nuts and pop their corn the same day it ships, so they reach you deliciously fresh. Satisfaction is guaranteed. At least with this cashew bag, I can definitely guarantee it. It's very high quality, and you can taste it. Nuts.com offers plenty of gluten-free options, organic choices, and other diet-friendly products. Whether you are looking for something sweet, savory, or need to stock up on everyday cooking essentials, you're bound to find something to try. Shop a la carte anytime or opt into hassle-free auto deliveries so you never run out of your favorite items. And if you're already stocked up at home, they also sell directly to businesses. Yeah, so like if you have an office and you need some high-quality snacks for your employees and the kitchen there, this is the perfect place to go.
Commissary.
Yes, a commissary. Right now, Nuts.com is offering new customers a free gift with purchase and free shipping on orders of $29 or more at nuts.com/majority. So go check out all these delicious options at nuts.com/majority. Nuts.com/majority. You will receive a free gift and free shipping when you spend $29 or more. Nuts.com/majority. Thank you to Nuts.com for sponsoring this show. And lastly, I know you guys all care about politics. You're watching this program, listening to this program, and if you like our show, you're going to like Future Hindsight. You know, we often feel hopeless and powerless, like we cannot do anything to change the status quo. I know many people have been feeling that over the past few weeks, but what if you could become a strategic player in politics? On Future Hindsight, Mila Atmos shows you how much power you have and how to use it. Think about it this way. If each of us could do just 2% more than we are doing right now, it would transform our democracy. So tune in every Thursday to get engaged and stay engaged. This week, Mila speaks to Hajar Yazida, about how Ronald Reagan sanitized the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and why we need to push back against the idea that racism is behind us. Kind of relevant in
Amy
the news. Yes. Maybe Amy Schumer needs to listen to Future Hindsight. I have my doubts. Find Future Hindsight at futurehindsight.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. futurehindsight.com. Check it out. Thanks so much to Future Hindsight for supporting this show. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be speaking to Blair LM Kelley. are back, and we are joined now by Blair LM Kelley, historian, and Joel R. Williamson, Distinguished Professor of Southern Studies at UNC Chapel Hill, author of Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class. Blair, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, when politicians say working class, I don't need to tell you this, but there is this implicit understanding of who we're really talking about here, and it's white people. And that doesn't really make any sense when you start to unpack it. I guess to start here, putting the question simply, how did that mythology come to be?
I think that's a great question. Oftentimes we've really separated the idea of the work from Black people for some strange reason. I think in part because it makes us think back to slavery. It makes us think back to times that are uncomfortable. And oftentimes when people are invoking the working class, they're doing so for political purposes, right? It's election time. They want to appear to be representative of the people themselves. They're going to some Midwest diner and talking to the folks who are getting their eggs over easy and, checking in at that time. They're not really creating a conversation about the real working class in this country, which is diverse, in which Black people are heavily represented, people of color are heavily represented. And for Black people, there's an interesting and rich and unique history there.
Yeah, I mean, and you write about that, obviously, in your book, and open up the book with a story about your own family and your origins, if you don't mind telling our audience a bit about that.
Yeah, I'd start the whole book with the story of my great-grandfather, Solicitor Duncan. He was a sharecropper in a place called Comar, Georgia, and he had to flee after being told, harvesting a whole year's worth of cotton, that he owed money at the end of the year. He was being cheated out of the value of his labor, and his family was, really had no choice but to leave. And oftentimes when we think about the working class, we're not thinking about agricultural work. We're thinking about factories and, folks who build things and put things together. But for Black people, the beginnings of their understanding of who they are as workers starts in oftentimes in those fields. And what they suffered and also what they had, the talent, the skill, the foresight that they had, is also there in those spaces.
Yeah, and it's also something you write about that I think is so key to understanding here is that the work in and of itself, the actions of work, the active nature of it gets erased seemingly when talking about Black people. It's more just when white people are poor, they're working class. When Black people are poor, they're just poor. And it's like erasing the notion that they are also still working while in poverty. I mean, that it's, you can see how many tropes kind of branch off of that and still exist to this day.
Absolutely. I think it strangely ties back to this notion of the lazy enslaved person. The most bizarre trope, I think, in our culture, because imagine being able to be lazy when you are forced to labor for other people. And so, the idea of the welfare queen and this disassociation that we have for Black people and hard work. And, we say, hardworking taxpayers, we're just evoking a picture that isn't a person of color, isn't a Black person. And I just wanted to, pick at the history of that.
Yes, and you do it over basically 200 years tracking this. But I actually wanted to ask you to flesh out that taxpayer notion too, because that plays very much into what you're talking about, which is just that if you're a worker, you're also contributing to society, and the white working class contributes to society. But Black people, they're not participating in our tax. They don't, in the mythology of it, or the racist tropes, that they don't earn the benefits that they have because they're not contributing, I guess, to taxes in the same way. Where does that go back to?
I mean, I don't know, because what's really powerful is I'm a person who began my career in studying segregation, and when we study the history of segregation, we see a whole generations of people who worked and got less back from the state. They got less schools, they got less public services, they got less roads, they got less everything possible, but they weren't taxed at some colored Negro rate. They were taxed at the same rate that every other worker was, and they literally did not get their fair share back. So the trope should really be the opposite, that for generations, Black people did not have access to the portion of the taxes that they paid.
Maybe it's just a way to work backwards to justify that kind of austerity towards certain communities.
It's something else. I mean, God bless austerity.
Yeah, well, I mean, or not. When
I say God bless, I really always mean the opposite. Always the opposite.
Look, I'm from the
family
north,
show,
so I'm just not from him. But I appreciate your.
I'm from Jersey, but I've taken on all the, let me pray for you.
I'm from Jersey too. I didn't realize that. Look at that. I mean, it's not a big coincidence. It's the most densely populated state in the country, but there you go.
The biggest diaspora all over the South.
Totally. Your first chapter centers around a blacksmith who was born into slavery, and then after the Civil War, moves around and tries different jobs. Why did you choose to start at that point?
He was the farthest back ancestor I could find on my mother's side of the family, and I think it was a powerful example of the ways in which the enslaved had skills that they were used for the benefit of others while they were held in bondage. But when they were free, they weren't allowed to work those same jobs. Those were now considered, more privileged to be a blacksmith, to, own a small business, to have those kinds of things. And so he never was able to work in those fields as a free man, but was that as an enslaved man. And so it was just powerful for me to discover that about him, to find him in the historical record, and then to flesh out that story. One that I heard in the abstract so many times when I was studying history, but then powerful to see it in my own family.
Right. And I mean, what did that say about the way that work began to be structured in and segmented and segregated too in the wake of slavery, and as Reconstruction failed and was put on hold?
I think it's really powerful. We just recently had this example of Florida schools wanting to say that slavery was this training program for Black people, and provided them with great access to skills, and shouldn't they be thankful? We now know, from actual history that the enslaved oftentimes came with skills, so they were iron workers or stone masons or brick makers in Africa. So they were often sought out because of their skills, and the skills that they could work for the benefit of others as enslaved people, they were stripped of the right to do that work, oftentimes by law. In some of these southern states, and certainly by practice. Right. And so it's really powerful to see the de-skilling of Black people that happens pretty systematically.
Yeah, that was the DeSantis controversy down in Florida, and it's just it's
God bless
completely
him too.
Right. Gosh, you're so much nicer than I am. It is clearly ahistorical given the context that you say, because there were different prices put on human beings based on the skills that they brought over when they were taken against their will from the continent of Africa. I mean, and in your research on this, did you see how some of those skills were passed down and were a part of like the understanding for many of the Black working class?
Absolutely. I think, we can see in slavery that people are, as you said, being purchased because of their skills. They're highlighted because of their skills. And then they don't have the right to it over time. But when we look back, I also really wanted to complicate the notion of skill when it comes to labor. Most of us, think of skilled trades. We've been taught in history classes, like a carpenter or a brickmaker or something like that. Those people are skilled and other workers are unskilled. But I write about laundresses, for example. They made soap, they boiled water, they could wring the water out of things and press things with just actual pieces of iron, and not burn up all the clothes and have them looking horrible. They were clean, they were folded, they were ready for the week under their skill. And they're considered unskilled labor. But I mean, I dare most of us to try and go do those things right now successfully without taking a better part of a month to figure all those things out.
It's also dangerous work. I mean, and
extremely dangerous work. And they knew what they were doing, and they passed those skills down over time. And so I love to complicate this notion of skilled work. During the pandemic, I was watching the farm workers reels about them harvesting vegetables, and you could see them grabbing a bunch of vegetables and packaging them up the way we get them in the supermarket before you could even really see what they were doing. And it was just a reminder, that's unskilled work, and yet it's not. And we have to change the way that we look at workers in history and in our present, and value the skills and the wisdom that they bring to their jobs.
I mean, there's no way for work or labor to be unskilled, basically, essentially by definition, unless, what's unskilled is earning a bunch of passive income off of investments. That doesn't require much skill to sit on your ass.
Those accountants are in there, honey. Those accountants are working.
No, totally. But like the people that outsource it to the accountants, I don't know if you can count that, like the money that comes from that as skill.
You have to work really hard to pick the best accountant.
I guess you're right. I guess you're right. Once again, more charitable than I am. You mentioned the pandemic. I know I'm skipping way, way, way into the future, but people can read your wonderful book to get the kind of the timeline and the history that you trace this through. But just to bring it to kind of our current context, these fault lines were really evident, I think, in the pandemic, and who was deemed essentially as sacrificial to continue their labor to keep our capitalist structure afloat in the midst of this major shock. And I'll never forget hearing, what was it, Ken Paxton, the attorney general in Texas. Was he the attorney general? I forget. Essentially saying that grandmas should be sacrificing themselves for the good of their children and keeping work going, even when we had only been shut down for a few weeks at that point. But the people that it was Dan Patrick. Sorry, Lieutenant Governor, not the Attorney General. My apologies. But from Texas at that point, that was really a real drive, and the people that were on the front lines of that were often the Black working class. How central was that period to your the impulse for you to write this book?
Yeah, I was writing during the pandemic, and so many essential workers were Black workers. Black workers are overrepresented in the ranks of essential workers by about double the population. They were not able to figure out what was going on. They couldn't shelter in place. They just kept working. So many of the women that I am at church with are CNAs. They work in hospitals. They were, food prep. They were postal workers. They didn't have any time away. They just kept working. There was no break for them, even as we didn't even understand exactly what we were facing. And so that profound sacrifice that working people had to make in that time period, went unrecognized. There was no big recognition of what they had done. And it it's a continuation of this longer history. The unequal burden borne by working people in this country just continues to be unrecognized. And so for me, writing this book at that time was just such a reminder that it's past time for us to recognize what working people do.
Yeah, and what does the recognition look like in terms of moving beyond recognition and into say reparations, but also wage increases and like a collective understanding of what we're putting a working class through to work 3 minimum wage jobs to survive, for example, in many states.
I'm so excited to see so many folks going on strike, so many folks thinking about labor differently. My generation basically was told over and over again that labor unions were bad for people. When I studied these labor unions, these Black labor unions in my book, I discovered that labor unions were concerned about the country as a whole. They're not just concerned about an hourly wage or better benefits for the folks that they are representing, but they're really calling the question of what workers deserve. They deserve health care. They deserve pay time off. They deserve living wages. They deserve to be able to live in homes near the places where they work. Our country can do much better when it comes to workers of all backgrounds. And Black workers and the history of Black workers is a reminder that workers have the wisdom to know what they need and to demand it. And we should start listening as a country.
What was your reaction to some of the coverage of these strikes too? And when we're getting the tropes of the working class, I guess, coming back to the fore, and who is working class and who is not, the portrayed image of the auto worker, for example, versus the reality and the diversity of the auto worker. And the solidarity shown, honestly, cross-racially in these massive strikes, which is inspiring and bridging many of the divides, I would say, that you talk about.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Even the actors unions have done a fine job of really, unearthing the exploitation that's at the center of their work. The auto workers, the UPS strike. People tried to come back like, well, UPS workers shouldn't be making $70,000 a year. But when we think about $70,000 a year in many places in the country, that's, just breaking through where you might be able to afford to live there and afford to, raise a family. And so why do we continue to push this idea that working people shouldn't be able to live in the places where they do their labor? We owe everyone so much more. And so I'm glad to see that all these union conversations have really been forcing us to think again about what workers are doing, and they're breaking the silence and the stereotypes about organized labor that have been pushed by folks who don't want to see it.
Can you talk more about the domestic labor too, and how that plays into some of the preconceived notions about who is working class and who is not?
What was powerful for me was to see that the domestic workers, folks who clean people's houses, watch their kids, cook in their homes, it was a burst of those women, Black women, who were doing that labor in the mid 20th century. I like to say Rosie the Riveter had a maid. So often we were thinking about the white women who were able to get federal jobs in the Second World War. Black women were, for the most part, and there were exceptions, but for the most part, not able to get access to those jobs without protest and without years of rallying to get access. And so the jobs that they got were in white households in that time period that were unprotected by the same federal jobs recognitions that everyone else had. And they continue to be unprotected by federal legislation. And we're still fighting to make sure that domestic workers have these right to organize, can be covered by the same basic things like an 8-hour workday and breaks and time off that everyone else can benefit from. This cutout that was, created by segregationists more than 100 years ago can't still stand. I mean, it's really profound to think about it. But, we have to do better. We have to continue to call the question of, what does this labor look like, and how essential is it? And it's not something we can outsource. It's not something robots can do. The care of our elders, the care of our homes, the care of our children is valuable work. And why aren't we paying a living wage?
It is incredibly important to point that out. I mean, given the fact that Gavin Newsom, a few weeks ago, 2 months ago or so, vetoed expanded workplace protections for domestic workers in California. Like, this is a problem that crosses party lines. And some of the things that you talk about, what domestic workers have had to go through with that little, the threadbare or non-existent protection from the government, is like wage theft is a guarantee, but there's also the opportunity, and there were instances of sexual assault that just recreate the conditions of slavery or continue them.
Absolutely. The profound ways in which it was an understood danger that Black women faced of sexual assault, particularly in times of economic crisis. There was something called the Bronx slave market that my favorite civil rights activist Ella Baker wrote about in the 1930s during the midst of the Depression, where Black women workers would line up on streets and get picked up for day labor, and then taken, and then oftentimes not paid, or given some old clothes or old shoes or food as pay instead of money that they had negotiated for, or were simply assaulted by the people who picked them up. And again, what's profound is that we can still see open markets. If you go to a Home Depot in many states in the morning, you'll see people who are waiting for work, who are unprotected, who are vulnerable to attack, to wage theft, to any number of things. And those conditions that Black women faced then are still being faced by workers today.
We've spoken about that on this program, how really the Republicans don't actually want to stop illegal immigration, as they say, right? Because they do want a permanent underclass of workers that they can exploit. And
absolutely.
I'm curious if you see parallels to the modern day a little bit with many undocumented people based on your research and your scholarship.
Yes. The vulnerability that Black workers have faced and continue to face are amplified for people who don't have documentation to work in this country. They are suffering from all those vulnerabilities that you could imagine because of their status. And it's really profound that we don't have a means by which to protect workers. And it suppresses everybody's wages. It makes those workers vulnerable. We need all the people who are laboring in this country to labor. Our country doesn't function without it. And so we need to find a way to make a gateway for workers to have documentation and status in this country in a way that's fair and open and available to the folks who we really still depend on.
Lastly, before I let you go, Blair, you also touch on the myth of the Trump working class voter, and there were working class people that voted for Trump, for sure.
Sure, absolutely.
But we saw this on January 6th, where some of the most frustrating dialogue afterwards was these are, people with lots of class resentment and working class people storming the Capitol, and you look up who they were, and they own
they got hotel rooms in D.C.
Yeah, they own a pool business in Missouri. Yeah,
you know how expensive it is to get a hotel room near the Capitol.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
They paid for flights to come to DC to do an insurrection, and you look up and they own a restaurant in. Yeah.
Bosses love to let employees do that.
Right. We need vacation. You need vacation time, right?
My gosh. The middle class that's full of resentment, is really the bigger part of that phenomenon. And so it was, it tickles me that, most working people couldn't afford to really take on all those challenges of the logistics of the Capitol on that day.
The logistics of a coup. Yeah, it's just that's what you get. Right. Working class people can't really work through that, I guess. But I guess even more than January 6th, just if you could expand on the mythology around the Trump voter and the white working class.
Yeah, I think, that as we said, the average Trump voter is a non-college educated middle class person. And, the mythology that this is really about the pain of the working class. The majority of the working class in this country is diverse and could be benefited by the things that we're all workers of all backgrounds need. Everybody needs a higher living wage. Everybody needs protections. Everyone needs decent health care that they can access. Everyone needs assistance with housing. This is not a racialized problem. I'm writing about Black Black people and the ways in which they have navigated this world. But the things that those workers need benefit every worker in this country. And so, if we can get past the danger of the mythology around race and the notion of this zero-sum game that we keep staying stuck in, the country as a whole could do so much better.
Well, Blair LM Kelley, historian, Joel R. Williamson, Distinguished Professor of Southern Studies at UNC Chapel Hill, author of Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class. Thank you so much for coming on today and discussing this with us. We will put a link to your book in the description wherever you're watching or listening to this and at majority.fm. Thank you, Blair, for your time today. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it was great. All right. With that, I'm going to wrap up the first hour of this program. Head into the fun half. We hear sirens outside. Is it the NYPD working with the FBI raiding a donor associated with Eric Adams? That appears to be the breaking news right now. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Bradley, you're going to need to find more.
The raid of the home of Brianna Suggs, a consultant with close ties to the mayor, came as Mr. Adams canceled a series of meetings in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, per the New York Times.
Lock him up.
Lock him up. I mean, this was a part of a rolling investigation that had yet to implicate Eric Adams, essentially. People close to him working with wealthy real estate developers for cushy deals on an apartment. One of the associates of Eric Adams. He had been, I think, monitored, I guess, or at least his conversations, and the law enforcement was very careful in saying that he was not implicated, but it seemed like there was a ton of smoke. Now there's more smoke here. Brooklyn home of his chief fundraiser, Brianna Suggs, a lobbyist who's deeply intertwined with efforts to advance the mayor's agenda, according to Jeff C. Mays.
In the past 2 years, Mr. Adams' re-election campaign has paid Ms. Suggs nearly $100,000 for fundraising and campaign consulting services via her company, Suggs Solutions, according to city records.
I mean, the dude was comically, kind of corrupt before this, and it was even a question of where he lived because he had so many weird workarounds on that front. But
well, I have it on good authority that when he was Brooklyn Borough president, he would literally sleep in his office.
Oh well,
at Brooklyn Borough Hall.
But then when
had an air mattress
at Borough Hall, right, yeah. right, not too far from here. Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right, Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had Malika Jabali on to talk about her book, It's Not You, It's Capitalism, and also David and I told some scary stories. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to that.
And on ESVN today, we will probably be breaking down the Harden trade, but also a very shocking and spooky Halloween for Josh McDaniels, and then we will be giving, and also the World Series. Congrats to the Texas Rangers. And we'll be giving our picks against the spread, youtube.com/ESVN show at 4 p.m. today.
Oh, also, we are, sorry for stepping on the end of your ESPN,
that was it.
But 600 YouTube subscribers short of 30,000 for Left Reckoning. So go over there, folks, and to help us get there.
Yes, definitely do that. Still waiting on Brandon and Binder. But we will have them in the fun half, most likely. Check out Doom, check out Scam Economy, Leftist Mafia Thursday nights. And for Brandon, check out his show, The Discourse. All right, folks, the number is 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it. All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half. Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them. Fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Back.
We are back, and we are joined by our buddies, Matt Binder and Brandon Sutton. What's up, guys?
The boys are back in town.
Hanging with the boys. Sushi with the boys. Yeah, if you guys don't know, that's how Tim Pool says the boys. I don't really know why we're putting an SH on the end. I don't think it's giving what he thinks it's giving. Is all I'll say about that.
I don't even know what it's giving, but you know.
Yeah. It's giving you don't have a very good ear for language. Brandon, how are you? And what's going on the discourse?
I am doing all right. Unfortunately, I've been traveling for a little bit of work, a little bit of pleasure, so I haven't had time to record with my boys. But I'll be back. I'll be back in town next week, and we'll have something out for you to make up for everything that I've done to my fans over the course of my work in media. But generally speaking, nothing for this week.
All right. Well, soon enough. People waiting with bated breath. Yeah.
I was gonna say they've waited long enough, so you might as well stick with me.
Binder, on the other hand, content machine over here. What's going on in your 3 different shows, putting us all to shame?
Not the week to say that. It was Halloween on Tuesday. My kids obviously need to come first. They needed to go trick or treating.
A family.
So I will make up for it because I am a content machine. There'll probably be an extra show sometime between now and the usual Tuesday show next week, or maybe even a Tuesday and Wednesday show next week. I'll let everybody know. Probably maybe even an extended show. I'll let everybody know. But tonight, Leftist Mafia. We're gonna do a special episode where we're all gonna spend the time there. Calling up our representatives for a ceasefire live on the show. We're scattered all over, so it should be interesting to see who we each have to call. Some Canadian PMs, some whatever they're called, MPs. I'm in New York, so I'll be calling my representatives. And so, yeah, that's tonight. Leftist Mafia. You could check it out at youtube.com/MattBinder.
Call Eric Adams and demand he stop traveling to Israel.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I'm calling Eric Adams. He has no. His calling for a ceasefire would be a moot. Who cares what Eric Adams?
He's got
Eric
his
Adams
hands
isn't
full.
even. Eric Adams isn't even viewed by New Yorkers in the 5 boroughs as the leader of New York City. So I mean,
Yeah, well, you may have missed this breaking news. Maybe that's why Brandon brought it up, that his top donor is having their home raided by the FBI right now.
Oh, really?
Or
Is he?
bundler, I should say. Woman. How dare you?
I did not know that, but considering it's Eric Adams, there's always a chance that something like that is happening to him. He's like he's like a supervillain.
He really is.
If Eric Adams hangs out somewhere for at least maybe 2 to 3 times, it is inevitable that that person who owns the establishment will be brought up in some sort of FBI probe.
Yeah, he really is. That
he just has a corruption fairy dust emanating from him.
It's contagious.
Like an aura.
I just want to get right into this because I've been champing at the bit to talk about this story. Look, folks, it's been a tough month, honestly, in news. And there are very few bright spots that we can point to. But this is one thing that may give people who are feeling a bit hopeless a bit of joy. And that is that Amy Schumer got dragged by Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter on Twitter in a way that, honestly, if I were her, I would retire from public life and change my name if this ever happened to me. I doubt that that will be the case for her since she seems keen on centering herself in every situation. But Amy Schumer, the comedian, posted this clip of Martin Luther King Jr. speaking about anti-Semitism on, and she posted it on her social media accounts. We'll watch this clip. But she's basically, within the context of what she's been posting, she's applying this to just Israel here. And it's another example of white people bastardizing the memory of Martin Luther King Jr. and exploiting it, not letting him rest, and not even living on with the values that he imbued in our society, to provide their claims with some sort of like artificial morality that does not exist. And King's daughter had something to say about this. But first, this is the clip that Schumer posted.
Must see that Israel must exist and has a right to exist and is one of the great outposts of democracy in the world.
My Jewish brothers and sisters said to me amid anti-Semitism anywhere, we don't need your support. We have enough Jewish power to deal with this problem ourselves. I would still take a stand against anti-Semitism because it's wrong, it's unjust, and it's evil. If my Catholic brothers and sisters said to me, amid bigotry toward Catholics, we don't need your support in this because we have enough Catholic power to deal with it, I would still take a stand against bigotry toward Catholics because it is wrong, it is evil, and it is unjust.
Must see.
So, I mean, that taken in a vacuum.
And also bomb them.
Yeah, right.
The terrorists, human shields.
With the way
Taking it
deepfakes are
back.
going.
Go
With the way
ahead,
deepfakes
Brandon.
are going, they'll be making those soon. They'll be making
Oh,
exactly, yeah.
they'll be
I'm
making
sure. Yeah, famously,
Parent to the religion. It's the motherload of bad ideas.
MLK was anti-war, except when Hamas was using human shields, and then it's just kill them all. That's what his legacy was. Just, I mean, Martin Luther King speaking about anti-Semitism and saying it's horrible is very much in keeping with the values that he promulgated.
Mm-hmm.
We are also against anti-Semitism. What Amy Schumer's not telling you that at one point Martin Luther King, he was supposed to go to Israel and he canceled his trip there because of, I think it was the 6 Days War. We can look that up at some point, but it was, yes, 6 Days War, Haaretz. It was canceled due to it. So the history of this.
First of all, it's much clearer since MLK was killed.
Yes.
In 1968.
Yeah. Not that it wasn't, I think a lot of people weren't saying these sorts of things, but like, when we have Ilan Papian talks about the new Israeli historians that basically like showed the documents and said, yeah, this is ethnic cleansing. And even the government of Israel was aware of this. That was in the 80s.
Right.
So I like the idea that MLK would have the exact same analysis of and say like Israel's democracy if he were still alive. I don't think so.
Well, I mean, it was the 1967 borders. Israel had just begun to go beyond those, right, at the period of his assassination. So it's just not applicable to this current context. And this is what Martin Luther King's daughter, who is still alive, had to say. Amy, certainly my father was against anti-Semitism, as am I. He also believed militarism, along with racism and poverty, to be among the interconnected triple evils. I am certain he would call for Israel's bombing of Palestinians to cease, for hostages to be released, and for us to work for true peace, which includes justice. He said justice is best, or at its best, is love, correcting everything that stands against love. We have much to correct. Here's a clip of my father talking about withdrawing from the Vietnam War and moral power. And do you want to play this? Honestly? Yeah, let's just play it. I mean, let's honor Bernice King's wishes here and actually portray what King was about.
The King was a woman in Vietnam.